On July 17, 1979, Alan Gelfand, an expelled member of the Socialist Workers' Party and young public defense attorney, filed a civil rights federal lawsuit in the United States District Court in Los Angeles, California, charging that his First Amendment rights to freedom of speech and political association were violated when government agents in the SWP leadership expelled him from his political party for raising questions about FBI infiltration. The suit named as defendants the heads of the U.S. Department of Justice, the FBI, the CIA, the National Security Agency, the SWP, and the SWP leaders instrumental in his expulsion. The trial, which began 4 years later on March 2, 1983, was a significant climax in the investigation. When the Workers' League began security in the Fourth International in 1975, it could not have anticipated that just 8 years later, this monumental trial would begin. The case continues to hold such powerful implications for the working class, the Trotskyist movement, the defense of democratic and constitutional rights, and the defense of historical and political truth. There are a number of key acts which comprise the broader drama that is the Gelfand case. In this lecture, Tom Carter and I will address the opening and initial unfolding of how the case began. I will focus specifically on the ways in which Gelfand first became aware of the initial findings of security and the fight for answers to questions, which ultimately resulted in his expulsion in January 1979. Gelfand had been a member of the SWP for about a year and a half when he attended the party's 1977 National Convention at Oberlin College. The Workers' League was intervening, handing out copies of the initial findings on security. It was here that Gelfand first came into possession of the documents that implicated Joseph Hansen in a covert relationship with the State Department and the FBI. At the convention, Gelfand raised his concerns to the SWP's National Secretary, Jack Barnes, and noted that as an attorney, the documents appeared legitimate to him. Barnes told Gelfand that the documents were in fact true and that their contents represented a part of the party's history which was supposedly known to many. He claimed that Hansen's meetings with the FBI were to gather information on Trotsky's assassination and assured Gelfand that Hansen would provide a comprehensive response to the allegations in Intercontinental Press. But Gelfand would become increasingly troubled as that reply never came. All the while, he continued to make a close examination of the documents uncovered by the IC and juxtaposed it with the pamphlet Healy's Big Lie, which the SWP claimed contained all the exculpatory information addressing the allegations. Through this examination, Gelfand found that the explanation in Healy's Big Lie did not answer the issues raised by the IC and frankly made no sense within the heritage of the Trotskyist movement. So in the fall of 1977, Gelfand attempted to raise the issue during a members-only SWP citywide meeting that included all of the Los Angeles branches. But the discussion was evaded when a leader suggested that an educational was the place to discuss this for clarification rather than a meeting. The second time Gelfand attempted to raise the issues was at a January 23, 1978 branch Tasks and Perspective meeting, where he was not permitted to complete a single sentence. The meeting ended with Gelfand being told he could not raise the issue again with anyone until the executive committee convenes to discuss. This was only the second time in 6 months that he attempted to have a discussion and was immediately prevented from speaking. It was just the beginning of a campaign of censorship and intimidation to silence Gelfand and prevent a discussion and exposure of the past and current agents within the SWP. 6 days later, he sent a copy of the remarks he had intended to give in a letter to Jack Barnes and the SWP Political Committee on January 29, 1978. He wrote, "I would initially like to introduce myself. My name is Alan Gelfand, and I have been a member of the SWP for approximately 2 years. Professionally, I am an attorney who has been working for Watts Legal Aid for 3 years. I am presently in the Southeast Los Angeles branch." In this correspondence, Gelfand would go on to explain how he has been censored in his branch and in a subsequent meeting with his branch organizer, Sharon C., and acting citywide organizer, Peter Camejo, who refused to answer even such basic questions if Sylvia Franklin was a GPU agent or if Joseph Hansen had a confidential relationship with the FBI. He makes clear that he has studied all the documents and poses an initial 10 questions related to Hansen's meetings with the GPU, the FBI, and the SWP's defense of Stalinist agent Sylvia Franklin. Significantly, Gelfand stresses that answers are required in order to prepare a factual defense of the SWP against all current allegations and future implications. He states, "These questions have been purposely posed in the sharpest and most direct terms. This is to ensure that the information which needs to be forthcoming in order to answer these questions will be more than sufficient to defend against not only the specific charges raised by the Healyites, but also any and all implications which may arise therefrom. The answers to these questions, therefore, will enable our membership to defend the integrity, principles, and reputation of our party, as well as that of our leadership, in the strongest, most convincing, and persuasive manner." What's important to note is that at this point, Gelfand is interested in getting to the truth in order to properly defend the SWP. After submitting his initial questions to Barnes and the SWP leadership on January 29th, Gelfand would send follow-up correspondences to the SWP Political Committee on February 15th, asking for a reply and also informing them that the executive committee in his branch has been arbitrarily told they cannot discuss his questions without their citywide organizer, Peter Camejo, who has been curiously absent from meetings. Gelfand received no answer to his January 29 and February 15 letters. So after 2 months of waiting for a reply, he appealed to the SWP's National Committee in a March 26, 1978 letter, where he begins, "I consider the writing of this letter to be the most important task I have undertaken in my life. It is the product of an intensive and thorough study of the history and principles of our movement." Gelfand details how he came to be aware of the documents, his initial conversation with Barnes at the Oberlin Convention, and his continued struggle for answers. Gelfand poses 3 central questions in this letter: whether Joseph Hansen was authorized by the Socialist Workers' Party to have personal contact with the GPU in 1938, whether Hansen had authorization from the SWP to meet with the FBI in 1940, and whether Sylvia Franklin, personal secretary to James P. Cannon, was a GPU agent. It is in this correspondence he goes into depth about the factual basis of each of his 3 central questions, drawn from the documents published by the International Committee, which have already been thoroughly reviewed in previous lectures. These questions are critical as they would form the legal basis of the lawsuit. In the letter to the National Committee, Gelfand posed the critical question. It has been almost 40 years, and Hansen still refuses to disclose the facts and details concerning his GPU contact and what, in fact, this valuable information consisted of. The GPU certainly is aware of what this valuable information is, since they gave it to Hansen. The US government, in all probability, knows or has a good idea of what it is, based on Hansen's conversations with McGregor. Why is it that only the Trotskyist movement is left in the dark? Gelfand's March 26, 1978 letter to the SWP National Committee was extremely significant. Not only had he laid out the central questions and crossed them with the implausible and false narrative provided by Hansen, he placed the allegations of infiltration of agents within the SWP as part of the historical crimes of Stalinism, the targeting of the Trotskyist movement, which has had to fight both Stalinism and US imperialism within the broader FBI infiltration of left-wing movements, for which numerous revelations had and were continuing to come to light. Gelfand wrote, "Well, comrades, it is clear from both the length of this letter and the research I have done that I care very much. I care about the GPU murder machine that has slaughtered Trotskyists throughout the world and who today continue to carry out their counter-revolutionary role by suppressing the dissidents in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. In this country, the GPU certainly continues to function, and in all probability, even functions in our own party, we being the primary exponent of Trotskyism in the world today." He went on to add, "I also care about the FBI. The FBI also framed and sent to prison 18 of our leading comrades in the 1940s. The FBI, who has infiltrated every progressive movement in this country, including our own, as well as having played an active role in the murders of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and numerous Black Panthers." Comrade Allen laid out that in the Dewey Commission, Trotsky exemplified the method for how to answer vigorously, aggressively, and factually charges made against persons or the movement. In his conclusion to the letter, he cited an opening statement from Trotsky at the start of the commission. "I do not demand any a priori confidence in my affirmations. The task of this commission of investigation is to verify everything from the beginning to the end. My duty is simply to help in its work. I will try to accomplish this duty faithfully before the eyes of the whole world." Contained within Gelfand's questions was a powerful appeal for answers based on the traditions of Trotsky, the fight against Stalinism and the Moscow trials, and the broader heritage of the Fourth International. Not only was Gelfand never answered by the SWP, he was met with increased diversion, gaslighting, threats, and intimidation. On March 30th, 1978, he received a letter from Pearl Chertov, a Los Angeles city organizer. She wrote, "I note that nothing in your document or previous statements provide any information that is not already public as part of the vicious slander campaign of the Healyites attempting to discredit the Socialist Workers' Party. Agent baiting, such as your document, is impermissible in a revolutionary organization. I wish to warn you that any further violation of the Leninist norms of our party will force me to ask the local executive committee to proceed with disciplinary action against you." A week after Chertov's letter to Gelfand, another reply was sent from Larry Siegel. "You have asked for our opinion about how you may proceed to press your charges against Joe Hansen. The answer to that question is simple. The party cannot and will not allow agent baiting within its ranks. Any further repetition by you of the Healyite slanders will not be tolerated." In this letter, Siegel claims that all the charges brought against Hansen collapsed like a house of cards, and that this had been answered in Healy's big lie. He threatened Gelfand that taking his questions any further will not be tolerated. Furthermore, he accuses Gelfand of whipping up spy scares, which Siegel claims somehow serve the interests of the FBI. He writes, Spy scares rarely uncover the real spies, who are invariably among the most determined and enthusiastic about security. Fueling spy scares, he says, is one of the favorite tricks of the FBI informers. He claims that the FBI knows quite well that setting an organization on the tracks of uncovering spies in its own ranks can do more to destroy the functioning than anything the FBI's own spies can do by themselves. Fortunately, despite repeated attempts, the FBI has never been able to use this tactic effectively against our party. That is because we simply do not allow agent baiting in our ranks. In what can only be referred to as the pinnacle of gaslighting, Siegel, one of the Carlton 12, ushered into the movement by Hansen and Barnes, tells Gelfand that the very practice of weeding out agents from the FBI is exactly the type of disruption the FBI desires. He's essentially saying that by allowing agents to remain in the SWP is how one can best prevent FBI disruption. Gelfand replied with principled opposition to the allegations that he was agent baiting, at a time, as has been reviewed, when there were widespread revelations of COINTELPRO, FBI infiltration, government assassinations, and major political scandals. Alan Gelfand, in a May 6, 1978 letter to Siegel, noted, "Reading your April 7, 1978 letter reminded me of Watergate and the struggle that Woodward and Bernstein engaged in against Nixon. They patiently and meticulously gathered evidence which brought them progressively closer to the White House. With each new revelation, Nixon responded by saying that these charges were lies and slanders. I again, therefore, in the strongest of terms, urge the political committee to reverse its position of covering up for Franklin and Hansen and openly and honestly answer, criticize, repudiate, or otherwise explain their respective involvements with the GPU and the FBI." Gelfand, in his May 6 reply, also informed the SWP leadership that he had submitted a Freedom of Information Act request that very month. Now, in December of that year, Gelfand filed an amicus curiae brief in support of the case, which Comrade Patrick Martin had mentioned, the SWP's lawsuit against the FBI. An amicus curiae allows an individual or organization that is not a party to a legal case to offer information, insight, or expertise that bears on the issues of the case. Its primary purpose is to assist the court by providing arguments and data that may not be fully presented by the parties directly involved. In the brief, Gelfand explained his proximity to the case as a member of the Socialist Workers' Party, who, as he wrote, has been inquiring for the last 1.5 years into the alleged FBI relationships of certain prominent SWP members. The center of this inquiry has focused on one, Joseph Hansen. Now, as has been reviewed, the Workers' League explained that the SWP's lawsuit against the FBI was a colossal political fraud, one which is aimed not at exposing government agents, but at providing a cover for government agents who have taken over the SWP. I think it's important to note that Gelfand's filing of the brief, the arguments contained within it, which included the documents unearthed by the IC, which put on official public record the collusion of Hansen with the FBI and the GPU, and the demands which Gelfand put forward within the brief, such as the call for the government to reveal the identities of all current and past informants, meant that Gelfand's amicus curiae represented the political antithesis of the SWP's fraudulent case against the FBI. It contained facts which the SWP and its leadership of agents sought to conceal from the membership and the working class more broadly. This was an important and principled step in keeping with the traditions of the Trotskyist movement. Gelfand stated that the issue before the court was the balancing of the interests of the right of a citizen to engage in political activity unfettered by governmental surveillance versus the supposed right of the government to monitor such activity. He argued that the government should be compelled to disclose the identities of past and present informants. In this argument, Gelfand challenged the legal doctrine of informant's privilege, which allows the government to withhold the identity of individuals who provide information to law enforcement on alleged criminal activities. The intention is to protect the anonymity of those providing information to the police and of protecting these informants from harm and retaliation. Citing earlier case law, Schneiderman versus the United States, 1943, and Roviaro versus the US, 1957, Gelfand argued that the informant's privilege is limited. It cannot be used to infringe on a defendant's right to a fair trial and cannot supersede a citizen's right to engage in political activity. He stated that the greater interest lies in a private citizen's right to engage in political activity without the fear, either real or imagined, of government surveillance. Challenging the supposed protections needed for informants, Gelfand explained that despite widespread knowledge among Trotskyists that GPU agent Mark Sborowski played a direct role in the murders of leading Trotskyists throughout Europe, including Trotsky's own son, he lives a comfortable life as a professor of anthropology at UC Berkeley and faces no threats. He also pointed to the revelations of deep infiltration tactics and provocations whipped up by the FBI through COINTELPRO, which has already been reviewed. Gelfand explained that rather than the need of informants to fear reprisals, it is the citizens engaged in political activity who were really the ones who had something to fear, and from the government itself, explaining that these informants certainly are not in the SWP to help build this party. Their ultimate purpose is to destroy it. Gelfand cited the well-known case of Gary Rowe, an FBI informant in the Ku Klux Klan in Alabama during the 60s. What came out was that Rowe did not just gather intelligence, he actively participated in and encouraged violence, including attacks on civil rights activists and other crimes, such as the 1963 Birmingham church bombing. With these examples, Gelfand notes that it becomes abundantly clear, therefore, that the purpose in disclosing the identities of the appellate's informants is not so that such informants can be harmed, but on the contrary, it is to ensure that the innocent members of the SWP will not be harmed by such informants. A number of the arguments made by Gelfand in his brief would become the basis of the legal theory of the Gelfand case, which Tom will go into greater detail in the next lecture. On January 5th, 1979, Jack Barnes sent the SWP Political Committee a letter charging Gelfand with undisciplined and disloyal behavior in violation of the organizational principles. In the letter, he makes clear it is due to Gelfand's submission of the amicus curiae brief. The brief represented a significant turning point, as it made clear to the SWP leadership that Gelfand was not only refusing to be intimidated or back down, but he was going on the offensive. And this was, of course, just the beginning. The irony, of course, was that Gelfand's brief went directly to the question in the SWP's case. The brief put on official record the numerous cables and communications regarding Hansen's meetings with the FBI. The subsequent expulsion of Gelfand from the SWP then proceeded at a very rapid pace. At the center of the charges and expulsion was concern over the submission of the brief and the documents uncovered by the IC. On January 5th, the same day that Barnes charged him of violating the party's principles, a letter was sent to Gelfand from Douglas Jennis, informing him of the charges by Barnes and that the political committee would meet January 11th to hear the charges against Gelfand. He was told over the phone by Roche that he might get invited to attend. On January 15th, 1979, Allen would then be informed via a letter from Mary Roche that the January 11th meeting resulted in an adopted motion to expel Gelfand from the SWP, effective immediately. Gelfand had never heard of Roche, nor was she a member of the National Committee. While Gelfand was denied the right to attend his own expulsion proceedings and put forward a defense, Barnes and Siegel invited Joseph Hansen and George Novak to that meeting. This group of agents led the charge against Gelfand's expulsion. On January 29th, Gelfand followed up with a letter rejecting his expulsion, notifying the SWP of his desire for an appeal and explaining that he was denied his right to a trial, as stated in Article 8, Section 3 of the SWP's Constitution. He demanded to know why he was not present at the January 11 meeting, citing he has a right to attend this trial, to present my position, to call witnesses in my behalf, and to confront and cross-examine my accusers. The SWP Political Committee would deny Gelfand his appeal to the National Convention, and again in violation of the SWP constitutional provision guaranteeing that right. A response from Mary Roche to Gelfand noted the fact that he had rejected his expulsion. She made clear that by taking your stand as a friend of the court in an action deliberately and clearly designed to disrupt the party's prosecution of our case, you have placed yourself in the camp of the government and its cops. She ended the letter stating that no further correspondence from you will be acknowledged. That summer, Larry Siegel produced the article, The Expulsion of Alan Gelfand, that appeared in the SWP's pre-convention discussion bulletin in July 1979. Siegel attempted to cover up for the undemocratic and unconstitutional expulsion by claiming that Gelfand's actions, despite being a member, somehow put him outside the rights due to him under the SWP's constitution, stating, "This was a qualitatively different matter than the case of an individual who commits even a grossly undisciplined and extremely disloyal act. It is important to note this distinction because individuals in this category are never denied their right of appeal to higher bodies. However, in the case of Gelfand, it was a question of recognizing that by his series of actions leading him into the camp of the capitalist government, he had chosen to place himself outside the workers' movement altogether, and thus outside the constitutional framework of the SWP. 2 years had passed between the initial questions raised by Gelfand to Barnes at the Oberlin SWP conference in the summer of '77 and this article. The records show that at every stage, Gelfand pressed the SWP leadership and Hansen for answers they were never going to give. The only inference that could be made was that all the charges by Gelfand and the IC were true. It's somewhat difficult to express the enormous political task that Gelfand was then confronted with after his expulsion, taking on the US government, the FBI, the GPU agents, and the SWP leadership. The fact that he did embark on that fight is a powerful testament that he and the IC who supported him represented the historical lineage and heritage of the Trotskyist movement, the fight for historical and factual truth, and the interests of the international working class. And now I'll hand it over to Tom, who will review the next chapter of this drama, the official beginnings of the Gelfand case.